Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm Amanda and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by PunchPass. I am so excited to be partnered with PunchPass because PunchPass is a booking software that lets you effortlessly manage your customers, the passes they purchase, and the classes they attend. It's the simplest, most flexible tool you'll find, and you get exactly what you need without the headache. They also offer 3 plans, so you don't have to pay for features you don't use. And on top of that, they have top-notch customer service. So head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM and get started with your free trial today. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you in part by the team at GetYogaStudents.com and Ron Medlin, who has been on the podcast before and is just a super awesome dude helping yoga teachers with their marketing. Has your yoga studio's growth become stagnant? If you're like many studio owners I talk to, you've tried every marketing tactic under the sun. You started a blog, you're posting regularly on all the social media sites, running challenges, sending out newsletters, etc., etc. Long story short, you're doing a ton of work and barely paying the bills. What if there was an easier way? A way to get new students regularly coming through your door without having to do so much work to get them there. A proven system that will consistently bring in 20 plus new paying students to your studio each and every month. Well, there is. Ron Medlin and his team at GetYogaStudents.com have developed a 3-step system that will help you quickly grow your yoga studio to 6-figure profits and beyond without being shackled to your business. So head on over to GetYogaStudents.com, check it out, schedule a free session, talk with Ron, and see if their marketing is something that might work for you and your business. And now on to today's episode of the podcast. I am so excited to be joined by Megan Mulrine. Megan is based out of Bali, Indonesia, and she joined me all the way from Bali to talk about the gods and goddesses and the deities that are a big part of the traditional yoga practices that we don't often learn a lot about. We sometimes hear the stories of how yoga asanas came to be, but I think for a lot of us as Western yoga teachers, we don't really know how to integrate this into our teaching and our practices in a way that feels maybe educated and appropriate. At least that's been my experience. Megan is the host of a 50-hour YTT, and she hosts it with a Balinese Hindu priestess, and they talk a lot about these deities and these goddesses and what we need to know as yoga teachers to start integrating these stories into our teaching. And I really love this topic because it's something that's totally outside of my comfort zone and outside of my expertise, but Megan does a really good job talking about the importance of this and why it's something that we should bring into our teachings as yoga teachers and how we can do it in a way that's respectful to the history behind these types of things. And for those of you who are maybe a little bit uncertain about the use of the word gods, these are very much deities. I think that that's a word that resonates with me. They're not, trying to be religious or anything like that. Megan and I talk a little bit about that, but I think it's always good to kind of preface that type of thing, especially when it is a little bit of a sensitive word. So we're not diving deep into religion on this episode, but talking more about the stories and the history of the Hindu gods, goddesses, and deities that are very important for the practice of yoga. So I hope that you guys enjoy this episode with Megan Mulrine, and without further ado, here she is. Megan, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here too.
Yeah, and I am so excited for this conversation. I've been waiting to have it with you for a couple weeks now, and I'm stoked to dive in. But before we get into kind of like the meat of this episode, let's back up a little bit. And can you tell me a little bit about your yoga story and how you first got into yoga?
Sure. Yeah. I think I had a little bit of an unusual introduction to yoga because, my mom had been into it when I was a teenager. So I'd gone to a couple classes while I was in high school with her, just at the local studio. But then I really started diving deep into yoga when I was in university. Because I went to Villanova University, which is a Catholic school. It's an Augustinian university. So a lot of the professors there are actually Augustinian priests who I feel like are like the original Jnana yogis, like all about knowledge and wisdom. So they're really like connecting to the spiritual through wisdom and knowledge. And my first like real yoga teacher was actually one of those priests. His name was Father David Cregan, and he was a professor for the theater department, and he also taught the yoga classes just at the gym at the school. But he would teach a class for the theater department that was basically about like how to project your voice while doing certain movements, dance moves. But a lot of it was like yoga poses that he was incorporating because he was a yoga teacher. So it was called voice and movement, but we used to call it yoga and yelling. So that's basically what it was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but he was so cool. And he had this really cool way of like integrating yoga philosophy. And he would still play the mantras and everything for music, for background music in his yoga classes, but at the same time talking about stuff that was really applicable to us as college students and things like that. So I got really, really into yoga then and just kind of always kept with it.
That's amazing. What was it like being taught yoga like by a priest?
Oh, it's so not like what you would expect, I think. Because the Augustinians there, they wear like robes, basically. So they're kind of dressed almost like monks in a way. So he would come into the gym class, in the robe, but then take it off and just had normal like gym clothes underneath and tattoos and stuff. Like he was so cool. He was such a cool yoga teacher, but at the same time had this spiritual kind of philosophical presence to him as well. And I just really like the interweaving of the different kinds of philosophy, because they're all really saying a lot of the same things, about kindness and love and compassion. So it's very cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what a neat experience to have like starting out. And so how long did you practice before you decided, okay, I want to teach this?
Yeah, so at that time, even while I was still in school, I was teaching at the writing center. I was a writing tutor, so my degree is in creative writing. So I would tutor at the writing center on campus, and I had started integrating some meditation and mindfulness techniques for the students that I was tutoring, because around midterms or finals, I noticed everybody was so stressed out, and I would just integrate some breathing practices and stuff into our tutoring sessions. So I would kind of say that's like when I first started realizing that I wanted to teach. And then right after graduating, it was kind of the typical story of like an office job in a cubicle. I was the marketing manager for a laser engineering company of all things.
Ooh, interesting.
There's like not a whole lot of creative writing jobs out there. So there's a lot of like scientific writing. So that's kind of what I was doing, and hated it, of course, and like wanted to get out of the cubicle so bad. So I ended up taking my first yoga teacher training in the States at that time in Virginia Beach, which was kind of like Iyengar inspired. It was very alignment, very anatomy based. And then shortly after that, my husband ended up getting stationed. He was in the military. He was a Marine, and ended up getting stationed in Japan. So we moved to Japan, and then I was teaching yoga in Japan for 3 years. And I think while I was there, I really got into Buddhist meditation, Zen Buddhism, Zazen, and all kinds of, Buddhist philosophy. So I went a little bit off the deep end from the very like alignment, Iyengar, anatomy-based training that I had in the States, and started getting a lot more into meditation, which then inspired me to do another training in Bali. And then it all kind of spiraled from there, of course.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And then what was it like, so I love Japan. I've only been once, but it's somewhere that my partner and I have talked about, like maybe going to live for a short period of time. What was it like to like teach meditation and stuff in Japan?
Oh, it was super cool. Yeah, there are just so many amazing opportunities there, because I was living just pretty much outside of Hiroshima, so in kind of central southern Japan. And it's very, there's not a lot of foreign influence at all there, so it's a very village sort of feel. And I was teaching everything from like prenatal yoga to, I was even teaching on the military base to some Americans, but out in town teaching some like vinyasa flow. They were really into all different kinds. And also into the meditation. So I was able to sometimes go into these Buddhist monasteries and teach yoga classes there, or we would sometimes do hikes up to the castles. The castles a lot of times are up on these giant hillsides. So we would hike up to the castle and then do yoga right out in front of the castle and meditate with the sunrise. Like, oh, I have such fond memories of it. It's such a cool place to live.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Wow, that sounds awesome. That makes me like just want to go back to Japan so badly.
Yeah, it's a really special place. And I think for the first place to live abroad, too, it's perfect because it's like culture shock for sure, but in an incredibly safe, warm, kind place. It's like it's as different I'm from the States originally, so it's like as different from America as could be, but in a way that's very, very safe and loving,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went there, I guess it would have been my like third time I'd been in Asia, and we were kind of on like a longer term trip when we went to Japan, and going to Japan was just like such a breath of fresh air after being in Southeast Asia for so long, because it's just like so organized, everything's on time, it's so clean, everyone's like so nice. And I mean, people are very kind in like almost every country in Southeast Asia, if not all of them, but just like a whole nother level of like people wanting to help us, which was just like, it's not really like that in a lot of other places. So it's just such a great place to be. I love it there.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, the neighborhood that we lived into was just maybe like 5 blocks away from the train station. This is just a very typical Japanese story. Like my neighbors would be late for work and they're running to try to catch the train, right? And they're running. But even though it's a very, very quiet road, very quiet neighborhood, if the crosswalk sign had the hand up, saying stop, even if there were no cars on the road, even if they were rushing to try to catch the train, they would still stop every single time, like they would never cross the road. No jaywalking exists there at all.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because we'd been in Asia for so long. I feel like we were like these like random white international people, like foreigners, like, oh, nobody's coming, we'll just cross the street, and everyone's like looking at us horrified. We're like, all right.
How dare you?
Yeah, that's not how this works here.
Yeah, it's wild. So it's really cool, like very clean, very safe, and felt really good to live. Yeah, peaceful, I guess is the word for it, very peaceful.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And then what brought you to Bali? You said you've been there for, I guess you said before we started recording that you've been here for like 2 years. So what brought you to Bali?
Yeah, it's just about 2.5 years that I've been living here, but the first time that I came was probably 2 years before that. And I had come, again, just researching because I had started getting more into kind of the spiritual aspects of yoga and wanting to learn more about the history of yoga. So I ended up coming to Bali to do another 200-hour teacher training with Santosha Yoga Institute, who we were talking about before we started recording as well.
Yeah, it's so funny that's where I did my 200-hour too. So such a small world.
Yeah, I bet we had really similar experiences because both of them, I did it in Canggu also at Serenity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I stayed there. I stayed in like the room that was right below the like kind of ladder staircase to go up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't stay there. I stayed offsite, but I can picture that area. Yeah. So I had come, and even it was right away, like almost immediately being in Bali, I felt this sense of, it felt like home. It felt like somewhere I was supposed to be and somewhere I was supposed to live. But I remember I was in the taxi on the way from the airport to Canggu, and there was this big statue. I can still picture it. It's in Denpasar. I drive by it pretty often, but it's like this big statue of the Ramayana story, and you can see all the Vanaras, all the monkeys, and Lord Rama, the god, the Vishnu avatar, like standing there with his bow. And it's this huge, amazing statue in the middle of the road. And the taxi driver had said to me, I had asked, oh, who is that? What is this statue? Because I didn't know anything about this. My background was more Buddhist in Japan. And he said, oh, that's Rama and Hanuman. And immediately it clicked in my head, Hanuman, like Hanuman Asana. And I realized that I did not know that Hanuman meant anything other than monkey. Because, a lot of times we just translate the yoga pose names into the animals or whatever. So I always thought Hanuman Asana, monkey pose, the front splits pose. And I didn't know at that point that Hanuman meant anything other than just monkey. I didn't know that it was the name of a god, right? Mm-hmm. And then that sort of like spiraled me into this study of Hindu mythology and the Hindu epics and learning all about the different gods, because actually so many of our yoga poses are named after gods, which I don't think we realize a lot of the time. It's not really taught in, at least in Western yoga teacher trainings that often, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I got like bits and pieces of it through trainings over the years. And then my 300 hour, we did like a whole section on like the gods and goddesses and the deities and like learning a bunch of the stories behind them. And I was like, wow, there's like so much that I had no idea. And I've been teaching for like a number of years at this point, having like no real idea where the names for these physical postures come from.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I thought of the analogy the other day. It would be like, imagine if there was a pose where you're standing with your feet together and your arms outstretched at shoulder height, and it was called Jesus Asana, right? But everyone was just calling it cross pose, and no one knew who Jesus was or what the story was or why that pose would be named after Jesus, you know? But then once you know the story and you understand the history of the thing, like there's all these other elements that then go into the pose, where it's like a feeling of sacrifice, a feeling of compassion for the world that you might experience when you put your body into that position. Do you know what I mean? Like that's exactly what we've done with yoga, where these poses are actually named after gods for specific reasons because of stories and positions that they put their bodies into. But we don't know those stories, and we miss out on this whole other element of the practice, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so was it like that? Was it that kept you in Bali or kept you coming back to Bali? Like, what was it about Bali that you're like, okay, this is where I'm going to like start my business?
Yeah, cool question. Yeah, it was that feeling of just, I felt that I'd been here before. I felt that it was somewhere I belonged, like it was somewhere that I should call home. And then, you know, because I've also traveled to India quite a few times too, but being in Bali, I think the spirituality here is so open and warm and welcoming. Like you've spent some time in Bali, so you've probably noticed it too. Like people will be driving down the road on their motorbike, just smiling for no reason, you know? That's kind of the warmth and the energy of Bali. It's so light and it's so welcoming and so warm. So I think that's probably a big reason why I and a lot of other people feel like they want to make this place home. But for me, it just felt like a really accessible way to get deeper into those studies, because people, I mean, that was a taxi driver, you know, everybody was so willing to share and willing to invite me along for ceremonies and to be a part of things here. So I was able to learn quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. Yeah, I definitely feel that connection to Bali as well. It's one of those places that I feel like if the visa regulations were like a little more straightforward and a little more lax, I would definitely we might be having this conversation in person.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, because I ended up teaching for Santosha Yoga Institute for the last few years. So I was teaching on their 200-hour teacher trainings. And then now I'm just going through the process of starting my own business here, which you're right, is not super easy to do. It's a lot of steps and there's a lot of regulations and things. But I think in the end, really worth it if you know you want to be here long term, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. If you're like, okay, this is my forever home, then I think it's like worth it to go down that path. I feel like we were kind of in the middle of like, hey, this might be like a nice place for like half or like a quarter of the year. And it's like,
right.
There's not really like a good option for that.
Yeah, right. But you could be hosting retreats here and things. There are always options to come and go too. A lot of people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's one of those things that if you want to make it happen, then you could make it happen for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So diving into a little bit more about the gods and goddesses, I feel like, you know, we were talking about kind of off the air, like how this is a part of the lineage of yoga and how these stories are something that's, you know, pretty important. But I think that a lot of times in the West, it just kind of doesn't get taught, or it gets like maybe a little bit forgotten, or people just don't even realize that it's something that they should know. And I think a lot of it comes from, you know, yoga is like very much presented as like this physical aspect, like the asana, and people don't want to like step on other people's belief systems, so they just kind of like leave all this other stuff out. But my understanding of like the gods and goddesses is not that it's necessarily a religion, but just a deeper way of understanding the lineage. But I'm kind of curious, you know a ton more about this than me. What's kind of like your perspective on the gods and goddesses, and then how can we kind of like uphold this part of the lineage in our teachings?
Right. Yeah, because that is the difficulty with this, I think, is sometimes people, especially in Western communities, they'll almost cringe at the word God to begin with, or they have this feeling like we shouldn't be sharing these things because they might isolate certain people who don't have the same religious beliefs. And I remember reading an article in the Yoga Journal a while back. Andrea Ferretti put together this kind of roundtable discussion that was, is yoga a religion, was the topic of it. And I think that's almost like asking, is prayer a religion? It's like the thing itself is not affiliated with any one religion, or doesn't need to be, but it can also be used as a practice to connect you with whatever your beliefs are. Or, yoga originally, yog means union. It means yoking, the connection. So maybe that's your connection to the divine, or maybe that's your connection to yourself. But I think why this is so important to at least understand the history of where the practice is coming from is to avoid things like cultural appropriation, for example. And I remember, I just did a workshop recently with Leslie Kaminoff, who wrote Yoga Anatomy, and he was saying that his teacher, Desikachar, who that's the same lineage that I'm studying in, like Krishnamacharya, Tantric Hatha Yoga, and Leslie was saying that Desikachar was invited to a workshop back when he was alive. This was probably back in the 80s. He was invited to be the keynote speaker of a conference in the States all about yoga. And he came, he's from India, he's Krishnamacharya's son. And he came and saw the Om symbol, for example, absolutely everywhere on the walls, on the carpets, tattooed on certain yogis' feet, places where it shouldn't be necessarily. And instead of giving the keynote address that he was supposed to give, he ended up giving a speech about how disrespectful that is, essentially, and how it's become so far removed from the very sacred thing that it is for Hindu people to now one of the guys who had hosted the conference had named his cat Om, and to Desikachar, that was just the final straw. You don't just use this word just because it's cool, but without actually understanding the relevance of it, which, I have kind of mixed feelings about, because I think anyone who would name their cat Om or get Om tattooed on them clearly has a relationship with that sound, and maybe it's not the same that a Hindu person would have, but it is a deep enough relationship that you're willing to permanently imprint it on your body, It's just, I think we can avoid some cultural mishaps if we understand the history a little bit better.
Yeah. It's a conversation that we had in my 300-hour training that I just completed that I think is an important conversation to be having, is where is yoga coming from? What was it originally taught as? What is the lineage that you're teaching? Acknowledging that, and then knowing that you can also you can still teach as a unique individual teacher while still acknowledging that the lineage that you're teaching is coming from. I think it does. It does become a bit complicated when you add in the word God. I feel like that's a word that I've had to personally figure out my own kind of relationship with, because I didn't grow up in a religious house, and it was never I never had a relationship with a quote unquote God. And then I'd read things about God and I was like, well, I don't relate to this because that's not really in my personal belief system or my personal practices. And then it was interesting because I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I started teaching down there, and I taught at a studio where we weren't allowed to Om, and we also weren't allowed to present yoga as any type of belief system or religion, which is really hard because when you look at the 8 limbs of yoga, asana is only one of them, and you start looking at the niyamas and the yamas, and they're talking about ways that we should be living our life. And I was like, well, right. It doesn't necessarily need to be a religion though to practice these things, because if I wrote a blog post that said 5 ways to be a better human, and I listed out those things, it wouldn't be a religion. So it's kind of all in the presentation a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, and even if you look back at the history as I understand it, yoga, Ayurveda, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all kind of stemmed from something that was called Samkhya Philosophy. And Samkhya Philosophy, really all that it's saying is that we have source divine energy within each of us, right? And everything else is external, but there's this like soul source in each of us. And that's kind of the foundational belief of all those things. And it's sort of irrelevant whether or not you believe in a specific God or something like that. It's like, no, you have divinity within you, and all things have divinity within them. You know, it doesn't necessarily require any kind of religious belief in anything at all. So like, it's interesting when you bring up the 8 limbs, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Also, they only mention God in like Ishvara Pranidhana, one of the niyamas, which is surrender to God. But really, I think that Ishvara can be interpreted as a lot of different things. You know, it could be the universe. It could be that source divinity. It doesn't have to be Shiva necessarily. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So even like the Yoga Sutras themselves are, like you said, it's more a philosophy to live by than it is a religion. But with that being said, like, when you do look into the history of these things, Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, he is said to be, I don't know, have you ever seen statues or pictures of Patanjali? And he's half snake?
No, I don't think I've seen those. I'm feeling like I should have on my journey, but I don't know that I have.
Well, it's this really unusual thing because he is said to have been, if you've ever seen images of Vishnu, the god Vishnu, he is lying on this 1,000-headed snake, basically, called Adishesha or Anantasesha. And he is he's kind of the couch of Vishnu, like Vishnu lies on the snake. And in one story, Vishnu sent the snake down to earth to write about yoga, basically, to help teach the world a little bit more about yoga. So Patanjali, Pata in Sanskrit means falling, and Anjali is like Anjali Mudra, like the prayer hand. So his mother, who was a yogini, was praying for a son, and she had her hands in prayer, and then Vishnu sent the snake down to earth, and he fell into her hands, Patanjali, and she named him Patanjali, and he became her son, half snake, half man, who then wrote the Yoga Sutras. So, like, that seems very religious, even if the sutras themselves are not. You know, it's like the history and the culture surrounding that document is believed to be directly from the gods, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's quite interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff with that. And so I'm curious, like, what are some ways for yoga teachers to start like integrating this into their classes? Like when you learn stories of Hanuman or Ganesha or, you know, Shiva, Shakti, I don't know, Kali, Durga, like how do you start bringing those elements into your classes without, you know, I guess like having somebody be like, no, like there's a reason that I go to church on Sundays for my own stuff, or I pray separately, or I don't practice a religion. Like, how can we kind of integrate that?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the key question, right? Because I think, you know, the gods as manifestations of the divine, I feel like in a lot of ways they're more representative of different aspects of human nature, you know? Because when you hear these stories, they're not always inspiring as far as like, what would Jesus do? It's not like, what would Shiva do? Because sometimes Shiva is like the Virabhadra story, for example, the story of the warrior poses is literally him sending a warrior down to chop off someone's head. Warrior 2 is like chopping off the head. Warrior 3 is like planting the head on a stake, you know? So it's not even exactly like ahimsa. When you hear these stories, it's not necessarily in line with that kind of philosophy. So I think for me, when I'm talking about these deities in class, it's using them as representations of things that we maybe struggle with or things that we're working on, and using those stories sometimes as cautionary tales, sometimes just as kind of stories with morals that help us to better follow the sort of philosophy that we're all striving to follow, no matter what our religious beliefs are. Kind of like you said, if you were to write a blog post that says 5 ways to be a better person, you can use these stories as like examples of how to be a better person or what to work on in yourself that you're struggling on. So I think for me, it's a really great way to set intentions for class. You know, if it's like you mentioned, Ganesha, maybe about finding more balance or getting rid of the obstacles in your lives that are holding you back on your path to peace or whatever it is. So you can kind of incorporate them as overarching themes and not specifically, okay, now we're all going to worship Ganesha, you know?
Yeah, using it as like a storytelling or like a theme intention setting piece of the class, as opposed to like a here's like instead of delivering it, I guess, is like an education piece. It can be like a sprinkle of education.
Right. And that being said, too, like, I think we should definitely tailor our classes to our audience. Like, Krishnamacharya's main thing was teach to the individual and teach what's good for your student, not what's good for you. So just because I like sharing these stories, if I know that it's going to offend one of my students or upset them or totally throw them out of the experience, I won't share it. You can still talk about the same themes without having to mention the deities. But I think in general, we assume a lot that people aren't going to connect with them or that people are going to be offended or put off. But pretty much whenever I've shared these stories, people find that it adds a lot of depth to their practice, and they find themselves really connected with it a lot more deeply than they were before. So I think sometimes we should give people the benefit of the doubt a little bit too, that maybe they're actually interested in learning about another culture.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think a lot of people come to yoga to deepen their own practice. And I think a part of deepening the practice is not just like getting deeper in a back bend. Like, it's learning more about the practice of yoga, like learning more about yogic philosophy and yogic teachings. I think especially in the West, like, we get so caught up in like, okay, I'm becoming more advanced because I can do more physical postures, but that's not really the entirety of being, an advanced yogic practitioner.
Right. Yeah. And I think people are actually looking for that depth too. And sometimes they don't know where to find it, so they come to Bali, of course, eat, pray, love, they want to find that depth. And sometimes even in Bali, like that's kind of why I decided to go off on my own too, is because I had this feeling that there were so many yoga schools here that are American run or Australian run that end up not at all connecting with the culture here in Bali, because there's not enough time in a 200-hour training. You're so constantly like, there's hardly time to go visit temples or actually see these statues that I'm talking about that actually have the depictions of the stories that the yoga poses are named after. It's just hard to incorporate that in. So people are definitely searching for it, and they're feeling these effects whether they know the history or not.
Absolutely. Hey yogis, I just wanted to take a quick little break to talk about the FavYogis app. The app is back with new features for teachers that let you create and manage your own private classes while making payment and registration a breeze. Do you have regular private clients? Make life easier with autopay. Forget about remembering to Venmo, or if you're Canadian like me, PayPal, TransferWise, whatever we use to try and get payments on time and when we need them. With FavYogis, you can use autopay to enable repeat payments and keep calendars in sync with classes. Google Calendar integration automatically updates teacher and student classes when you make changes. It's still just your yoga, teachers add classes, students add teachers and students stay connected. Head on over to the App Store and find FavYogis. It's FavYogis, and sign up completely for free. Set up your profile, give it a test to see if it works for your classes and your students. Oh, and don't forget to use code MBOM and let them know that I sent you. I also wanted to talk quickly about Offering Tree. When you're a yoga teacher and you're trying to build your digital presence, it can be super daunting. First, you need a website. There are a lot of great tools for building websites like WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace. Then you need a way to email your students. Again, there are tools for that like MailChimp and Constant Contact, but that's another account to pay for and another password to remember. Then you need a way to schedule and register your students. Again, there are tools for that, but it's another account to create and pay for and another password to remember. Oh wait, how do I integrate my scheduling tool with my website? It's a lot. Instead of putting all of this stuff off for another day because it's just too daunting, let me tell you about a better way. Offering Tree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes that has your schedule built right in. They also have email marketing tools to collect email addresses, send newsletters, and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. I am a huge fan of Offering Tree. When I first connected with them, I really felt like it was too good to be true. But after playing around with the software, I realized that it really is an amazing service that encompasses pretty much everything we need as a yoga teacher with a small yoga business. So to learn more about what Offering Tree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. Offering Tree has been supporting MBOM for close to a year now, and I not only love the products, but I also love the people. They have a special pricing for MBOM listeners, so be sure to go check it out. Once again, it's offeringtree.com/MBOM. And before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to quickly talk about Punch Pass once more. You heard about Punch Pass at the beginning of the episode, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about them. One of the things that I love about Punch Pass is that you can focus on the business you enjoy and let them take the hassle off your hands. Another one of the things that I love most about Punch Pass is that they're a small business just like you. They have really designed their product to be for you, for the yoga teacher running a small business. There are so many amazing softwares out there, and you guys hear me talk about a lot of different things. And one of the reasons that I like partnering with different software programs is because everyone is looking for a little bit of something different in their business. And I totally understand that some software programs are just not what you're looking for. But with Punch Pass, I feel like it's really designed for us small business yoga teachers. They have affordable packages, a free trial where you don't even have to enter your credit card, and really just the type of customer service that I'm looking for as a small business. If I need help, I want help pretty much right away, and you get that with Punch Pass. So head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM and start your free trial today. All right, thanks so much for listening, and back to the episode.
So if somebody wants to kind of like integrate these in, so are other ways to talk about them kind of like, I guess like if you're trying to avoid using like the word maybe like God or goddess because you don't want somebody to get like the wrong idea about it. Obviously you can use deity, or you can tell maybe as like a story, like if you're planning like your peak pose is full splits, like you could tell the story of Hanuman and bring sprinkles of the teachings of Hanuman into the practice as you get them into Hanuman Asana. Is that kind of like how you would do that?
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. You could say, there's an Indian story about this pose. You don't necessarily have to say Hindu or a story about a god. But yeah, Hanuman Asana, there are a couple of poses that are named after Hanuman. Virasana pose, so the kneeling pose where your heels are kind of outside your bum, that's considered a pose after Hanuman, as well as Anjaneya Asana. Anjaneya means son of Anjana. It's another name for Hanuman. That's like the kneeling pose. Like you have one, how would you call that? A low lunge,
like
basically.
Low lunge with your knee down, yeah.
Yeah, with your heart open, and especially if you like bring the hands behind you and releasing the fingers so the heart's really open. But if you know the story of the Ramayana, again, not even considering it as like a religious story, it's just a story that shows up in pop culture all the time. Like, did you ever see the movie The Little Princess when you were young?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did.
It was like a little girl who she was living in India. Her father was in the military, and then she got sent to a boarding school. It's a super sweet movie. It's so good. But the opening scene is her living in India and retelling this story of the Ramayana, and they like act it out and everything. And I remember I loved it as a kid. And then when I started actually learning about the Ramayana story, I was just amazed because it's the story basically of Rama, who is an incarnation of the God Vishnu, but Rama's wife, Sita, was kidnapped by an evil demon, and he had taken her, this 10-headed demon stole her away and took her somewhere where no one knew where she had been taken, and Rama was searching the woods desperately for her, trying to find her, and instead he found Hanuman, this monkey god. And the monkey god saw that Rama was Vishnu. No one really knew that he was this incarnation of this god. So Hanuman saw Rama for who he truly was, and he vowed to help him find his wife who had been kidnapped. So the stories of those poses is Hanuman still had no idea where she had been taken. So he just knelt down in Virasana, in prayer, in hero's pose, and he asked for guidance to help find her. And then what he did was he took a leap of faith across the ocean. So Hanuman Asana, our front splits pose, is named after Hanuman leaping across the ocean. ocean, and the wind god carried him across the ocean. And that's why Hanuman Asana gets its name. So that leap took him from India to Lanka, which is where, it's Sri Lanka now in modern day. And that's where Sita had been kidnapped. So Hanuman was able to help rescue her. They had this big battle there and they were able to save her. And when they got back, Rama and Sita wanted to give Hanuman gifts to say thank you for helping to save Sita. So they were giving him jewels and pearls. And he said to them, I don't need your gifts. I would do this for you anytime. Look. And he knelt down in Anjani Asana, so in the low lunge pose, and he physically opened his heart and showed them that their names were written on his heart. He said, I would do this for you anytime because I carry your names in my heart. So it's this kind of story, like whether or not you say the god Hanuman and this, that, if you can tell that story while teaching those poses, you can really feel like when you try the front splits, you can feel that sense of sacrifice and having faith in yourself that you'll be able to find your way there, even if you don't know the way. And when you kneel down in low lunge and you open your heart and you find that back bend, opening the heart in low lunge, you feel the sense of being able to send love to those people whose names you carry in your heart. It's like, it just adds this whole level of depth. So whether or not you go into that full story like I just did, when you're teaching those poses, when you're in low lunge, you could be saying, bring to mind some of your best friends or some loved ones in your life and imagine that you're sending love to them. As you open your heart, imagine the love pouring out from your heart, or imagine that their names are written on your heart. You don't necessarily have to tell the story to get the same effects,
Yeah, I love that. I was just
cool.
totally in that story.
Yeah, good.
I know you do a training on this, but are there any other resources for people to learn these stories? Is just a Google search? Where can you find this information?
So I've been studying with a Balinese priestess here, and we host trainings that are very immersive into the spiritual aspects of yoga. So we do all the ceremonies and stuff. But there are a couple of books out there because you could read like I do. You could read the original texts like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, or there's a book out right now called, I think it's just called The Myths of Asana. It's a purple cover. It's by, I wish I would have looked this up before. It's Kaivalya something. But it's kind of it's like you could read the entire Bible or you could read children's Bible stories. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit like the children's Bible stories of this kind of thing. It's a really good book. I also have an ebook out about the topic that's specifically for yoga teachers. So it talks about how you can incorporate those stories into class as well. And I can tell you the website for that at the end, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, it's kind of actually funny because I have an aunt that's quite religious. Her husband, who's now passed, used to be a priest, and she gave me a child Bible when I was young. And I distinctly remember all the photos in it. It was so pretty.
Cool. Yeah.
So I feel I'm totally into that as an adult as well. Something that's very interactive that gets your mind kind of around these stories in a more in a way that's easier to digest.
Yeah, it's very accessible that way. It's not like you have to dive so deep into all because they're so long. I mean, it's kind of who needs Lord of the Rings when you have the Mahabharata, because it's these epic tales.
Oh, yeah. I feel there's a lot in there. And plus, all the translations are kind of different too, right?
Yeah, for sure. My favorite ones, if you do want to read some of the original text, there's a guy named Ramesh Menon, I'm pretty sure is what it is. But he writes really, really beautiful translations because he's it's line by line, but he's really trying to preserve the original poeticism of the original stories. So it's quite accessible, actually. It's very easy to read. It comes across just the beautiful stories that they're intended to be, rather than sometimes people get a little bit too nitpicky about exact translations of every word, and then it loses some of its flavor, Right.
Yeah. So something I'm kind of curious about that I've thought about a little bit with this topic and kind of around cultural appropriation is sometimes I feel people end up, I guess, quote unquote, culturally appropriating unintentionally. It's they're trying to be thoughtful to the lineage, and because they don't understand things, they just maybe don't incorporate them into classes, or maybe they don't talk about them, or maybe they don't acknowledge them because it's not within their their knowledge, or it's not something they feel super confident about. But then it can kind of come across the wrong way as like, oh, we've just excluded these things that are important. What are kind of your thoughts on that? And how as teachers can we start, I don't know, I guess start not doing that?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, because a lot of times, I mean, it was like me, I was shocked to find out that these pose names, because you use the Sanskrit in class as a teacher, and I had just always been told Garudasana means eagle pose. I didn't know Garuda was a god. Virabhadra means warrior, but I didn't know Virabhadra doesn't actually, they're not actually direct translations. So a lot of times it's no fault of the teachers at all. It's just that they've never learned, they've never been told. So I guess that kind of starts at the teacher trainings, really, I think all 200-hour trainings should be at least acknowledging that. Not that you have to dive super deep into it, but at least starting to at least open people's eyes to that. But I think as far as cultural appropriation, it's a lot about intention, I think, too. If your intention isn't to make fun of people oming or something like that. If your intention is, wow, when I om, I feel a really strong connection with that sound, and I feel connected to the other people in the room when we're oming together, and it feels really powerful to me, then even if you don't know the whole history of om and how it's been used in the past, I think it's okay. It's okay you should have that connection to it. Everyone innately, I think, has that connection to the sound. So I would say it's one of those things where it's follow your interests as much as possible. And if you're not as interested in this stuff as I am, for example, you don't have to go so deeply into it, as long as you're respecting that this practice it's not just Pilates, it comes from a very ancient, very sacred source. And I think most yoga teachers, even if they're teaching at LA Fitness or whatever, they know that, or they acknowledge that, and they feel that sanctity of the thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. And I totally agree with that. And I think it is intention. That's been sort of the thoughts that I've come back to, because we had a big discussion about this in my training, and I was sort of I feel like people aren't, for the most part, I feel like yoga teachers aren't trying to disregard these things. I think it comes from really not knowing.
Yeah, completely. And, if I think back to the history as I understand it, and especially in the lineage that I'm studying, the Krishnamacharya lineage, it's kind of so, like I mentioned, there's that Samkhya philosophy, that base philosophy, and then you have the Yoga Sutras, which even the Yoga Sutras and the 8 limbs, even when they did talk about asana as one of the limbs, it was still really just talking about meditation poses. It was all just seated meditation postures, and the whole purpose of yoga, the whole purpose of the 8 limbs is leading you into a state of meditation, which again, we know meditation does not require a specific religion. But that being said, the Yoga Sutras at that time and up until basically the late 1800s, yoga was only practiced by the religious elite. It was only practiced by the Brahmin caste, by the upper class priests in India, and only by men, often by ascetics living in caves, So the history as I know it through Krishnamacharya, Sri Trimula Krishnamacharya was one of these Brahmins, basically, who was studying with his teacher in a cave for 7 years. He learned all about yoga. And this was kind of at a turning point in Indian history where India was beginning to start wanting its independence from Britain. And it was this kind of turning point where India was trying to reclaim its cultural identity. And Krishnamacharya's teacher, who was one of these ascetics in the cave named Brahmachari said to Krishnamacharya, I think this is a really special moment in India. I think that this is time for you to go out and start teaching to regular people, not just priests, not just ascetics, not just keeping this with the religious elite. It's time for this practice to start moving out into the world. And we don't know very much about Brahmacharya at all because he died in the cave, I'm sure. So Krishnamacharya then took what he learned there and started teaching to, young boys, for example, young Indian boys who are not of the Brahmin caste. And that's where Iyengar studied with Krishnamacharya as a teenager. Patabi Jois studied with Krishnamacharya as a teenager as well, who started Ashtanga yoga. So he was starting to teach to regular Indians. And then eventually he started teaching even went to women, which was unheard of. And then he started teaching to non-Hindus. He started teaching to foreigners. And then from there, it just grew and expanded and exploded. So I think it was an intentional turning point in the history of yoga to make it no longer just for Hindu priests, now for everyone, So there's, even though the history is very, very strongly influenced by Hinduism, in the modern day, it became actually the entire world can use this practice. The entire world can connect to this and benefit from it no matter what their religious background is. So when I think of it like that, I realize, oh yeah, regardless of what the history was, whatever it's become today is so useful for everyone, no matter what your belief system is, and that's intentional. That's how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. It's so interesting to think about like the history of yoga and where yoga came from, and like how different it was when you think about like years and years ago, like hundreds of years ago, and what we know of it now and how it has taken shape, like in the West specifically. But I'm kind of curious, like having this strong, like rooted background in the history and the philosophy. And I know you're over in Bali, so maybe it's a little bit different, but something I find like teaching over in Canada and the US is like people are very like focused on the physical. So something we talk about as teachers is like, okay, we want to teach people these deeper teachings, but I find like as I teach public classes, it's like almost like people are like, okay, get on with it so we can do like the physical. Like, how can that be harder? Like, make it harder. And I'm like, it's not just about like coming and sweating. Like, if you want to just go sweat somewhere and do push-ups, like go to the gym. That's not what yoga is about. Yet it's like people are paying for this. So there's this like customer experience. So you sort of need to deliver a bit of what they want, but then it's like also upholding the integrity of what yoga is. And I'm just curious how you navigate that personally.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a cool point. There's a studio here in Canggu called The Practice. That's really wonderful. They're really teaching a lot of like classic kind of tantric hatha, and they have their advanced class on the schedule. People show up all the time expecting to do handstands and all this crazy stuff, but actually it's just getting really deep into the breath and poses. And I get so many complaints of people being like, this was supposed to be an advanced class. It's like, yeah, it was really advanced. But it's tricky, because I think you're right. Like what sells, or what are people going for? But, I really like this teacher, Mark Whitwell from New Zealand, because he says, no matter what your yoga practice is, even if it's, Bikram or whatever, it's like, it's what's happening inside that makes it yoga. It's not the physical shapes, it's not whatever arm balances you're doing or how many chaturangas you're doing that makes it yoga or not yoga. It's your connection with yourself through your breath. So even if it is a really challenging practice, even if it is a really vinyasa heavy practice or something, if you're able to connect to your inner self through your breath, to find that quietness in the mind, like after Shavasana, everybody feels so much better after a yoga class. That's the yoga of the thing. The poses are almost irrelevant to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny that you're saying that, because I just subbed like a level 2 class the other day, and I was getting the vibe that people wanted like a harder asana, but I'm like part of being an advanced practitioner is like you're not moving, like I can't hear your breath, like you need to breathe.
Yeah.
Like you're not in an advanced practice if you're not breathing. Like
that's so true.
Like if you're like, it doesn't matter if you're upside down or like on your head or like lying on your back, like if you're not breathing, you're really not practicing.
Right. Oh man, I wonder, that would be awesome though, to do a class where the first 10 minutes is like reteaching all the basics. Call it an advanced class, but then the first 10 minutes are just like going over the basics of breathing, and then try to do the difficult asana that they want to do. And if you can't hear them breathing properly, then you're like, nope, back to breathing.
People would be
down.
so pissed off.
Again. It'd be so good though.
It would be good, but people would be like quite upset, I think, in general.
That's true. I know, maybe not great for marketing, but
yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, I think it's like kind of an interesting dynamic. Like it's just, I think the longer I practice too, and the longer I teach, the more I'm sort of like recognizing that it's not all about that. And I think it also is remembering where I came from. Like, I came to yoga for the physical aspect of it, and I can definitely like put myself in the shoes of somebody who's like, come on, get on with it, like, let's get moving. Like, I thought this was what this is all about, but I guess maybe it's like sprinkling those teachings in.
Right. And, I saw a statistic not too long ago. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it said that for people who have been practicing yoga for more than a year, 80% of them, after about that year point, they say that their primary reason for practicing changes. Like, it might have started out as something physical, but after about a year of practice, for 80% of people, they say their primary reason is something different, like emotional or spiritual or something like that. So in my mind, I'm like, awesome. Like, if you come to the mat for goat yoga or beer yoga, or like just to get a really good stretch or whatever it is, no worries. Just keep with it, because eventually, they feel the effects other than the physical effects in time, no matter how they were brought to the mat, no matter how they got there,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's always been kind of, I guess, my philosophies behind like, goat yoga, something silly like that. Like, I'm like, if it gets somebody who doesn't feel like they fit into the studio setting doing yoga, I feel like it is a good thing. And then you can kind of deepen the practice from there. You can get them like going a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I also think like we as yoga teachers have a big responsibility for those beginner students too, because sometimes we, not purposefully, we accidentally make yoga seem a little bit scarier than it actually is, or a little bit, when you say, advanced practitioners who will come in and they're not following their breath, like, I think I was practicing yoga for a good year or two before I realized, like, I don't have to inhale exactly when the teacher says inhale, and I don't have to exhale exactly when the teacher says exhale. It's like, as a yoga teacher, if you tell your students, this is your natural breath, I'm just telling you what movement follows your natural inhale and what movement follows your natural exhale, and we can all be moving at a different time because we all breathe at a different rate, and that's totally fine. All of a sudden, like, the world opens up to them, because you can't, as a teacher, you cannot physically cue to the correct breath rate of 15 students in your class, because everybody breathes at a different rate, So then it just makes it feel impossible for students to actually move with their breath, So to give them that freedom will actually help people advance in their practice a little bit faster, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I love that. All like good things to consider. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to switch directions a little bit and talk a bit about your business so we can just link it back to all things business. So you run Yoga Trotter over in Bali, and you live the digital nomad life, which is super awesome. Can you tell me a bit about, what it's like being a digital nomad, what your experience has been like, what it's like running a business as a digital nomad?
Yeah, for sure. Digital nomad, yeah, that term now. And we were talking before we started recording, I'm working right now out of this co-working space in Canggu called the Dojo, which is just like teeming with digital nomads, like people who have found remote work working online and are able to live wherever they want to, in paradise in Bali, and just work out of these really trendy, cool places. So that's really awesome. But I think, sometimes this idea is a little bit, it's kind of the lore of a tropical island and everything, without the realization of how much hard work actually does go into it, So when I first came here, I was doing a lot of freelance writing, and I still do a lot of freelance editing because that's kind of what my background is in. But now to be hosting teacher trainings and things here is something that, I think the marketing side of it is always the difficult part. And especially for something like what I'm teaching about the gods and the deities, like we were saying, a lot of people don't know that they don't know that. So it's not exactly something that they're Googling, like teacher trainings to learn about the Hindu deities as they relate to yoga, because it's something that people don't even realize that they don't know. So I think, to be your own boss, essentially, and to move to a tropical island and work for yourself has this incredible dream-like aura to it. But the actual practice of it is like, you have to wake up 5 a.m. in the morning, and there's a 12-hour time difference between here and the States, so it's a lot of like really early mornings, really late nights. It's a lot of holding yourself accountable for everything, But in the end, it's so worth it to have that freedom to live where you want to live and do what you want to do and travel and come and go. It's like, I can't imagine going back to an office job after this, you know?
Yeah. I've had that's kind of like my lifestyle as well. So I've had the same experience. But yeah, it's funny with like being over in Asia, because it very much is like, you're like, everyone wants to contact you in the morning. I did so many calls between 6 or 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then basically nothing after. And then I wouldn't hear from anyone till 6 p.m.
Yeah.
So my work schedule was really kind of worked around other people's work schedule. It's and it's funny too, because when you're at those co-working spaces in Bali, it's who's doing the same thing, because we would be there super early mornings at Hubbard in Ubud, and then super late nights as well. And you can see all the other Americans, Canadians that are oh yeah, need to talk to a client early morning their time.
Right. Which is kind of exciting, to be around other like-minded people who are doing similar things and taking on these entrepreneurial tasks. It's very inspiring to be around people who have made, this is a life that, to my parents, for example, they still don't really understand, because it was this would never have been a possibility before the internet, for example, so it just seems so bizarre now that people can live like this and make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. It's always really funny. I don't know if you have the same experience, but it's always really funny when I go to family events where I don't know, my great aunts and my grandparents are there and stuff, and they're all oh, are you I used to work for Lululemon before we went nomadic and took all of our work online, and they're oh, are you working at that clothing store thing again? And I'm no, I work full time for myself. And they're oh, you do something while you're traveling? And I'm yeah, how do people think I have money? It's
Yeah, exactly.
Such an absurd experience. But then I have to check myself a little bit. My grandma was born in 1932.
Yeah,
this wasn't something that was a possibility for anyone that she knew. Of course, it's going to be something totally foreign to her. So,
right. This might as well be a different planet, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I'm glad you brought up the early mornings and the hard work, because I think, people have this idea that it's very, I guess, idyllic, and you get to go exploring and making money. And it's yes, it is that, but it's also like when I lived in Mexico City last year, it was very much my life was essentially the same as it would have been in Canada, except I lived in Mexico instead.
Yeah, you probably got to go to the beach a little more often.
Well, yeah, the beach isn't super close to Mexico City, but yeah, more than Canada for sure. Mexico City's pretty inland, but
I don't know.
Yeah, but still, no winter, warmer weather, cheap tacos, margaritas, all the good things. So,
but otherwise, just the same hard work. Yep, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's your life and your routine doesn't really change that much. It's just you get to be, you have the privilege of being in a really cool place doing that thing. Whereas it always kind of frustrates me on social media when there's work from anywhere, laptop lifestyle, and they're sitting on a beach with their laptop, and I'm no, sand is the worst enemy with a laptop. You can't see anything when there's sun. It's gonna overheat. It's gonna die. That's not a thing.
Yeah, no one's sitting on the beach on a beach towel with their laptop. That's so true.
Yeah, it's so funny. So
yeah, for sure. I think, it's what you choose for yourself. That's all that life is about. So if it's worth it to you to be traveling and to have that freedom to explore other cultures and things like that, it's yeah, you're going to have to work really hard. You're going to have to work really hard for yourself. There might be a couple of tough years before things take off. We certainly went through that. And it's worth it because it's the lifestyle that I want, But I think some people think, oh, it's so easy to do. But yeah, it's good. I would never discourage anyone from trying, because I think we can all make whatever we want to make of our lives. We all have that ability if we really believe in it. So I think anyone can do it, but it's just realizing if that's what you actually want. Because I see a lot of people try, and then in fact they realize that they're more of a creature of comfort, or they're more like their habits from back home and all those kinds of luxuries of the Western world, and they end up going back anyway, and that's fine. Like, it's just kind of knowing yourself and knowing your own personality and what fits best.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I always just like to like keep it a little bit real for people who are like, that seems amazing, and it's like, yes, but it's also a lot of hard work. But yeah, in saying that,
sure.
I do also believe that people should, find something that excites them to do every day. As far as we know, we only get to live once. Maybe we get to live more times. I don't know. But I just feel like it's like we should do something that we love to do in a place that we feel excited about doing it. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think when you're really like following your passion and just the thing that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning, when that's the thing that you get to do for work, like how can you go wrong? It's definitely going to take you down the right path.
Absolutely. And so on that note, if anyone's listening and they're like, yes, this is my path, I would love to do that. I want to like teach yoga or create a business online and travel around the world. Do you have any tips for anyone who's starting out with that?
Yeah, definitely. Especially like, retreats are a really big thing now for yoga teachers if they're starting to want to travel more, to start to explore a little bit more of a way to make some decent money as a yoga teacher. Like retreats, my experience, because I've taught on a number of my friends' retreats that they were hosting around here. And of course, I was doing a yoga teacher training pretty much every month for the past 2 years. And now to be on my own, starting these teacher trainings and retreats, like one thing that I've realized is how important it is to pick a venue that you feel really aligned with and that you get along really well with the staff there and the owners there and everything. Because I would say above all else, if you want to get into retreats, it would be finding a place that you just feel super connected with. Because I've taught at certain retreats and teacher trainings in the past where it was like in between the classes, there was all this busy work to do to set up the room so it looks perfectly, to make sure that all the food is going well. And the retreat host ends up being so stressed out just trying to get all the details organized. Whereas if you can find a place where they take care of all of that, you pretty much show up and you teach and you can do what you're passionate about rather than trying to organize all the minutia. It's like these things flow so much more easily and so much more beautifully when you have a whole team that really believes in the mission. So like for the Gods of Yoga teacher trainings, I'm doing 50-hour continuing education for yoga teachers. And I was able to find a venue that is on land that was owned by the family of this Balinese priestess for ages. So when she heard what I wanted to teach and we started talking a lot more and I started attending ceremonies with her and everything, it was just kind of a match made in heaven sort of thing where it was like, oh, this is exactly the place for it. This is exactly the people that I want here. They were able to take care of everything and made it such a special experience as well. Yeah. To have all of that right there. So I think that was kind of the tricky part about planning retreats was like, well, where to do it? There's a million retreat venues around the world, and in Bali there's so many. So to actually be able to like visit these places and connect with it first rather than just trying to do it remotely and plan all this stuff without ever setting foot there really seems to make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. That's a really specific piece of advice. I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it definitely did. I think retreats is definitely a great way. And then, yeah, I think finding like other teaching opportunities, maybe building courses online like you've done. I feel like all good stuff for getting started with nomad life.
Yeah, also because, I would talk to the students who are graduating the teacher trainings a lot about this because there are so many opportunities to travel to places on kind of an exchange basis where they'll be like, oh, come to this surf and yoga camp in Sri Lanka and teach for 2 months and we'll pay for room and board. And I've really mixed feelings about that because I think, if you've been passionate enough about yoga to do a 200-hour teacher training, to spend that money and that time at a training, learning as much as you can, of course, you want to have a little bit of experience teaching before you put yourself out there. But I don't think anyone should be teaching for free necessarily. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? I think it's a little bit of a way that places take advantage of yoga teachers by offering this like trade situation. What do you think about it? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I'm definitely don't sit in the camp of being all for free yoga. I think that there's ways that we can like give back to our community, or, you know, have a seva if that's your thing, without it necessarily being entirely free. I'm not totally opposed to the work exchange depending on what it is. I've heard of some where it's like you get accommodation in exchange for teaching like 2 classes a day. And for me, as like somebody who's well traveled, like if I was going to do that in Bali, I just don't think that that would make sense for me, because the amount that I would charge for a class, even in Bali, I could probably get accommodation for like one of those classes. But I think if, you know, maybe you're getting like accommodation and your food while you're there, and it's like you teach Monday to Friday in the mornings and the evenings, then it could be agreeable, I think. I think it's just looking at like what the energy output is in exchange for the return.
Right. And I love what you say too about, you know, a lot of us tend to have this feeling of wanting to do some karma yoga and like to teach for free when we're just getting started or whatever. But I think there are a lot of ways to do that are actually charity. You know, maybe it's like free classes in the park for the homeless or something like that, or at homeless shelters, or in, you know, prisons. Like there's so many ways that you can teach as charity, and like teaching for a resort or a surf camp for free just is not charity in my mind. You know what I mean? It's people who should be paying you, who can probably afford to be paying you, and also who then, especially like I see a lot of surf and yoga camps doing this, hiring yoga teachers just for room and board, but without paying them at all. And it's like, well, actually that yoga teacher is a huge part of your offerings. You know, they are like the heart and soul of a surf and yoga camp, you know, they serve in church as the yoga teachers. So I think one thing that like yoga teachers who are just getting started out can do is pull from your other talents and your other skills, not just as a yoga teacher, because you had a life before you did your teacher training and you had skills, whether it's photography, writing, management, whatever your skills are, art, you know, and you can kind of make yourself more marketable to places like that. Like if you go to one of those camps and say, hey, I'm a yoga teacher, but I can also do your copywriting for your website, or I can also take amazing photography for you, like hire me properly, and I can make something of this, you know, rather than just these kinds of exchanges that end up, I think, bankrupting a lot of yoga teachers, and also in a way sort of cheapening yoga as an offering in general, because then people start to expect, oh, yoga is just something people like to do for free. They don't need to, you know, make money off of this, when actually it's a lot of our careers, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that as yoga teachers, we need to stop devaluing ourselves. Like we pay thousands of dollars for trainings, and it takes, you know, it's a lot of like prep work and study to get ready for a really great class and to curate something that's going to be, you know, a great sequence that feels good in somebody's body, and then say all the right things at all the right times. Like it is hard work when you're there. So yeah, I think it's kind of like right now we're kind of in like a cycle, and I think the cycle needs to break a little bit, because it's sort of like, you know, if people aren't paying enough for the classes, then studio owners can't pay the teachers because they have other, you know, things they have to pay for to run a business. And then as teachers, if we're taking our teaching out of the studio and we're charging less than the studios, then we're kind of devaluing the studio prices, and then they can't bring people in. And then, you know, if we're giving away all of our services for free, then people don't really even understand why they should pay for it. So I don't know, it kind of like starts and ends with us as yoga teachers. And I think it comes from getting out of lack mindset.
Yeah, wow, cool. I love that about your podcast too, because I've been listening for a while, and I think that that's something that you're able to talk about quite beautifully, because we do have this feeling of, because yoga is something that's so sacred and, you know, spiritual to a lot of us or whatever, we do kind of feel a little like icky making money off of it sometimes. And like you said, that ends up having us devalue ourselves and what we're offering.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes to this almost like when we talk about, you know, the goat yoga. It's like, okay, you know, if somebody's going to come to yoga because goats excite them, or puppies, or whatever it is, like, that's great. And I think sometimes, and I've even experienced this as a yoga teacher, when somebody's like, I'm like, just come to yoga, like, you're going to feel amazing. And they're like, oh, I can't afford it, I don't have time, excuse. And it's like, well, I'll just comp your class. Like, will you come then?
Right.
And then it's like, you know, we do what we think we need to do to get somebody through the door. I think there's some situations where that's fine. Like somebody understands, like, hey, I'm going to do you a favor so you can come do this. And if you hate it, you never have to come again. But if you like it, this is a one-time offer. But I think that in some instances, it kind of, then people are like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I like it. Like, I'll just see if I can go for free again.
Right. But I think, if money is legitimately the barrier there, like if that person just doesn't want to come, whether it costs $10, $20 or nothing, then it doesn't matter. But if money is legitimately the barrier, someone actually can't afford, because studios are expensive these days, it can actually be a barrier to entry for some people, then I love the idea of studios offering kind of a sliding scale or some kind of exchange where you say to students like, hey, if you really are going through a rough time financially, talk to me, just keep that open line of communication to say, by all means, like if you can't afford this, I don't want you to not be able to come to yoga to do the thing that makes you feel better because you legitimately can't afford it. And I've noticed, in your case, you were saying if you invite a friend who you just want to experience it and having it for free is like, sure, an hour and a half or whatever that I don't have to pay for, that's a great way to spend my afternoon, I guess. But for people who actually can't afford it, it's nice to be able to accommodate them in some way. And I've noticed that anytime I've offered a class, like where I don't say, not necessarily donation based, but like a give what you can kind of class. And then you give the recommended, like normally this class would cost $10 per person, but pay what you can. Inevitably, the people who can afford will pay more. Like it almost always balances out in the end. The people who can't afford won't pay, and the people who can will pay a little extra to help them out. The world is a good place, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I've had that same experience. And I think that a lot of times, like, it's kind of like, oh, humans are selfish. But I think that like humanity is not innately selfish. I think there's, obviously exceptions to that. But I think it's usually comes from something other than like the actual human quality. Like I think people are very generous with their money if it's something that, they feel really inspired by, or they feel really like has profoundly affected them. Or if they feel like, hey, like I was going to pay $20 to go to this class. Like I'm happy to give this teacher $20. Like I don't think humans are innately selfish. But yeah, I also agree with you. Like I think that, and that's the thing is like, I think people think, okay, to make it accessible for everyone, I need to like devalue it. And I think having something like a sliding scale offering or a pay what you can isn't necessarily the same as like devaluing it, because it's not saying, hey, it's free, but it's making it accessible for everyone. So it's just a way of like opening the door a little bit wider while still making sure that you get paid.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Making the door a little bit wider so more people can enter, so more people have access. I wonder, like, that's a great theory, but in practice, how does that actually work? Like, how have you seen that work out at studios before? Is it just, because I've done it just as like a footnote on the website, like, hey, if you really can't afford this, talk to me kind of thing. But I don't know, is there any way to systematize it or do it better than that, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Like in the community that I live in Alberta, where I live in the summer, asterisks in the summer, I work as a studio manager and a teacher at one of the studios here. And, the studio owner is like very business savvy, very business minded, but he's also like very community focused. And so we have it in place. We took away like all of our discounts, like, oh, if you're a student, you get a discount, or a senior, you get a discount. We took that away, and instead there's like an affordable services program in the town. And so we made a special discount for those people. So like they have access to the services for a more affordable amount. And then we put a note that said like, hey, if you have a circumstance that means that this is too expensive, just send us a note. So instead of assuming that like a certain group of people might need a discount and excluding everyone else, we just made it so like, hey, just send us an email. We can talk about your situation. And then depending on the situation, like maybe it's a single mom and they're really hard, like it's really hard for them to get to yoga, but they do want to come, then yeah, of course, like we'll give them a discount on their pass. So yeah, I don't know, that's how we've kind of done it in the community that I'm in now. And I think it works really well in this community, but I think it's like really important to look at your community and look at like, who's coming to yoga, who has maybe challenges with money, like how can you financially help them while not having it the type of situation where people are taking advantage of the system, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because imagine, even if you take like the student discount, for example, surely there are some college students who are living off of ramen noodles and really can't afford it. But then there's probably those who come from really wealthy families who everything's paid for and they can absolutely afford yoga. It's worked into their budget. So rather than assuming something about some group of people, yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to do it, to look at the people who are actually in front of you and what their needs really are. That's cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious where we can go, where people can go to find you. I want to be mindful of your time since I've kept you here for so long.
Yeah, no worries. This was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, no, I've loved every second of this. But yeah, where can people go to find out more about you if they want to train with you, learn from you, take your course, etc.?
Yeah, so my website is yogatrotter.com. It's like Globetrotter, but yogatrotter.com. So you can go there. I have some meditation podcasts on there. I have a blog. You can have all the information for my upcoming workshops and retreats are all on there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so fun.
Yeah, for me too. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
All right, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Megan Mulrine and maybe you learned a thing or two along the way. If you are interested in taking the next Gods of Yoga YTT, it's coming up November 11th to 16th, 2019. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's Yoga Trotter, so TROTTER.com/Gods of Yoga, and you can sign up there. As always, you can find all of the links and notes about everything that we talked about from today's episode at mbomyoga.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga, and you can join the private Facebook community at Yoga Business Badasses. Just search it in Facebook, answer the questions, and I'll let you on in. Since the last couple of episodes have been about, stress management, slowing things down, that type of thing, we've been having lots of those types of conversations in the group. And I don't know if it's just the time of year for me. I feel like lots of people ramp up with fall, but with my change of travels going from Canada to Mexico, I am taking things a little bit slower, which has been such a nice change of pace after a really, really busy last 6 months being back home in Canada. So join the community. I would love to hear from you, how you're feeling going into the fall season and heading into the Christmas season pretty quick here. As always, you can send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com, and I really appreciate you listening. A huge thank you to the sponsors for today's show. Shout out to Punch Pass, FavYogis, Offering Tree, and the team at GetYogaStudents.com, and particularly Ron Medlin. They are all sponsoring the podcast so that I can continue producing this for your listening pleasure, and I would really love it if you went and checked them out. I don't choose sponsors randomly. I really make sure that I have a relationship with the companies that I'm engaging with and that I'm putting on the show. So I hope that you guys go check out their offerings and see what they have to share with you to help you grow, expand your yoga business. All right. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.